Right, jumping into Transmutation now. Starting with the first three, Prestidigitation, Thaumaturgy, Druidcraft. These kind of go together because they all sort of fill in the gaps of the cantrips for their respective classes. But the difference is, some of them are good and some of them aren't. Prestidigitation is really good because you can summon non-magical objects and you can create illusions and you can trick people and you can heat up your food and have warm soup. Druidcraft is bad because you can predict the weather and do almost nothing else. And then Thaumaturgy is somewhere in the middle where you can do cool show-off effects that can usually be used to like squeeze an advantage into a charisma check or just intimidate and make your character seem quite imposing, but in terms of actually like changing the outcome beyond like making a good impression on someone, it's a bit more limited. It's better than Dancing Lights. Mending, really hard to place this because it basically really depends on how much the DM is committing to realism and things getting damaged and like broken by accident. If the DM is very committed to realism and you're likely to be damaging your armor or breaking the terrain around which you're fighting, it's a really good spell. But usually, and sadly in most games, that's not what the DM's going to be doing, and it's very unlikely that you'll have consequential damage to just the things around you when you're fighting. Even if someone's casting like big things like Fireball, it's unlikely the DM is going to consciously be tracking the damage to the terrain. So with that in mind, Mending probably goes down here. Magic Stone is a spell for doing range damage with the bonus upside of being able to give the stones to other people to help them. The downside is the damage is kind of bad and it's worse than just using a crossbow, assuming you have even a slightly good dexterity modifier. And so the only scenario it's ever good is if you have a party member who has literally no ranged weapon, at which point you can either take the Magic Stone cantrip and hand them a Magic Stone and cast it bonus action every 3 turns, or you can walk to a shop and buy them a crossbow. Yeah, just not a very good spell. Versus the melee things like Shocking Grasp, Poison Spray, probably worse, yeah. Message, really nice spell, useful, not crazy good, because obviously it's not completely subtle when you do it, you have a few things that can be picked up, but it can be very nice for incorporating into a group when you're sneaking around, and just especially for being able to communicate when you're doing some sort of covert thing in a large area. I'd put it there. Thorn Whip is a Lightning Lure, but with less damage, a more commonly resisted damage type, and it doesn't affect creatures that are size above large, whereas Lightning Lure does, but it's got double the range, and simply because it has double the range, I'd say makes it slightly better than Lightning Lure, because 30 foot versus 15 foot is the difference between being able to attack an enemy and then run away, and attack an enemy and immediately be subject to an opportunity attack if you try and escape. Primal Savagery is another one of those touch spells where you have to be right next to the enemy to cast it. It does D10, so it's got good damage, but doesn't really have any bonuses. Obviously it's from the Druid list, so they weren't really trying to compare it against that. But yeah, when you just pop it up against things like Shocking Grasp, Poison Spray, I'd say that it's definitely not as good as Shocking Grasp because the advantage. Poison Spray, I'd actually go it above, because while it's one less damage die, the fact that you're rolling to hit means that you can potentially get advantage on the attack, and also acid damage is much less resistant than poison. And then we got Shangri-La. This is another melee one, though unlike the lame melee ones that don't get agility modifiers, this one is a long-term effect that will let you add your spellcasting modifier to all of your attacks, and it makes your attacks just generally kind of good. I'd say I'd put it up... Actually, for the purpose of what it does, it's really good. The only problem it has is it's quite situational because you don't always want to be going melee combat. So I'd say somewhere around below the Green Flame Booming Blade. It's in this class of spell, but I'd say it's slightly below because these ones have that little extra. And lastly, we get to what I think of as the Avatar spells, which are respective ways of manipulating different elements. So there's water, earth, air, and fire. And starting with in reverse order, we'll kick off with Control Flames. Potentially really cool spell, the idea of being able to move fire around, but in terms of what you actually get out of it is just kind of bad. You can make a flame go out, and you can ignite one, and you can make things brighter, but all of these effects really are pretty inconsequential, and most of the things you get out of it you can get out of with the spell Bonfire and some creative ways of making fires go out using other spells. Kind of bad. Mold Earth, kind of good. big DM dependency on whether or not the DM determines things being loose earth. There's literally no other place in the rules that quote unquote loose earth is mentioned. If the DM is liberal with it, you can dig tunnels to your heart's content and go crazy. If the DM is really stubborn, you'll be almost never able to use it. Assuming you have a very generous DM, which I'll assume for this one because I think quite often at the time DMs don't realise that they can be strict about mold earth, I'm going to say it's a very good spell. Probably actually better than Bonfire. Not as good as Prestidigitation due to this, more uses. And we got Shape Water. I'm going to do Shape Water last. Gust. Again, this is more in the Control Flames category. As Mold Earth, you can dig tunnels and interact with the world around you and like create physical objects. Gust, you can push someone 5 foot. Pulling people 10 foot isn't very valuable. Pushing them is a little bit better, but again, this is really you're just picturing the one situation where there's someone on a ledge, you can knock them off it. And in those situations, there's usually a more creative way of getting them to move 5 foot than having to have a cantrip constantly in one of your slots waiting for that. So I guess it's better than Infestation. Right, lastly, Shape Water. This might be one of the more controversial, if not the most controversial placing on this tier list. But I would put Shape Water at the top of S tier. I think this is a phenomenal cantrip that 90% of players and DMs just completely sleep on. If you actually read what you're able to do with it, you can basically form the water into almost any shape you want, and having formed it into that shape, you can immediately freeze it. You can create 5 foot by 5 foot solid ice structures out of this, and you can have 2 active at once, which means you can have two 5 by 5 blocks. You can create stairs, you can stack them on top of each other, you can make a never-ending ice bridge where you delete parts you're going along and then you keep going forwards. You can hollow out a hole in the water and then drop down 10 feet down toward the bottom. Huge amount of usage out of it, and also you can simply just lift a 5 foot chunk of water out of the ground and then just bring it along behind you with the spell around it, pushing it as you go. Really powerful spell. I might do a future video just talking about how good Shape Water is. And I think, yeah, that's where we'll stop for this one, and we'll wrap up the rest of the cantrips in the next one.